Hi, folks. Hello, hello. My name is Elizabeth Mathern. I am joining you guys today by myself to talk about U visas. I think that's what we're going to talk about today. And U visas are an incredible thing. You might have questions. I'm going to give some time for people to join. I'll give you a few thoughts on what I have about what's going on in the world. I think everybody's still thinking about and worrying about the current Georgia legislation. When's that going to go into effect? How does that impact how we make decisions today, if at all? And also we are, let's see, there we go. That was kind of distracting me. Also, we really want to talk about just, some applications that people can submit, talk about them in a little bit more detail, and just so you understand what's out there and what you need to consider. Okay. So while we wait for people to join, I've got 30 minutes with you tonight. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to engage. If you see this Facebook Live later on, feel free to post questions. We do go back and check, and I'm more than happy to engage with you in a private chat or however we need to do that. Okay. Comment, like, share. The more hearts and bubbles and thumbs up and stuff that you do, the more people will see this, and the more people can be helped by the information that I hope I'll be sharing with you today. It is pretty hot here in Georgia. We are, I think, starting to feel what summer is going to feel like, at least getting a little taste of that now that we've passed Memorial Day weekend, so it's almost officially summer. It is hot, so that's nice. All right, so let's touch on the Georgia legislation. It's on everybody's mind. You're seeing it get a little bit of traction in the news, but not a ton. I think that let's just recap what it is, right? So the Georgia law that the governor signed in really relates to whether or not a detention center or a jail reports to the federal authorities, the immigration authorities, who's in their jail, and kind of puts a little bit of pressure on. It's not a little. It's a lot of pressure on local jails to analyze whether or not a person has status in the United States. That status is a legal analysis, and immigration law is federal, and there's a lot of case law that establishes that that's something that's held very close to the federal government, because immigration law comes directly down from the president to the attorney general, and then everybody that works sort of for ICE, Department of Homeland Security, the immigration court prosecutors, that's the Office of Chief Counsel, all sort of work under the direction of the policy direction of the president. So it is highly political, but it's also called, federal preemption. So it's something that is exclusive to the United States federal government, because it's kind of one set of laws is applied across the whole country. It's applied differently in different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions are more conservative and analyze the law in a certain way, and then those cases go up to an appellate board and the Supreme Court, right? So to sort of try to establish some commonality across the board. So that's what we're looking at. But this law seeks to put into the hands of jailers in local law enforcement to analyze whether or not somebody has status, and then if they don't think they do, to report them to immigration, to make sure that immigration knows about them, right? So that's a place where they could get things wrong, and they don't have immigration experience. So it is something that could potentially give people give them detained or make them detained when they are lawfully in the United States. So it's a place that's sort of ripe for issues. And I think that that's where I think that the potential for litigation and freezing the law before it really even goes into effect for very long. But it hasn't even gone into effect. And I think that law enforcement would take it seriously now. So they probably are already taking steps to make sure that they report people to ICE. So we're sort of operating under the effect that it's already a thing, right? And so sort of thinking we're seeing more ICE holds and we anticipate more people will get ICE holds. So we need to strategize with that as an assumption. Okay, so let's talk about U visas. And let me make sure if anybody has any comments, please feel free to, or questions, please feel free to ask them. I'm always open to talking about politics and giving you my thoughts on what I think will happen with, this election. It's coming up really quickly. Hopefully, if you're eligible for naturalization, you filed it so that you could vote. Remember that you can't vote in the election if you're not a U.S. citizen. But let's talk about U visas. So U visas are something that a lot of people have heard about, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand. So a U visa was originally designed to help support people who survived violent crimes, or a loved one who stands in the shoes of someone who lost their life to a violent crime, or a minor who was the victim of a violent crime. I hate the word victim, but in that sort of instance, I think it's more easy to understand what I'm talking about. So not every crime can qualify for a U visa, and not every person can qualify for a U visa, right? The idea is that if the idea is that we want, as a general theme, for people to report crimes that were perpetrated against them so that the perpetrators can be held accountable, right? They're like not out on the street, so that they could be put through the justice system, can be arrested, accused of the crime, and given the opportunity to fight the allegations. But ultimately, the goal of the justice system is to make the world safer, right? Make our communities safer. So if immigration enforcement is able to detain and deport anybody that they come in contact with, then it follows that people can be afraid to report a crime because they're reporting it to law enforcement. Law enforcement is the one that takes the report, and law enforcement may report them for not having status to immigration authorities. So the U visa was designed to sort of address this fear in the community of reporting a crime, but also, in my experience, I think it was designed because there are certain perpetrators out there that intentionally seek out people without status because they think that there's a less likelihood that they would report the crime, right? So it's a higher chance that they'll get away with the crime, and they can victimize somebody that won't necessarily report it, right? So the U visa is designed in a way to get people to report crimes who don't have status and who might not have otherwise reported it. Law enforcement has to sign a certification that you reported the crime and that you were helpful in the prosecution. Who law enforcement is in that analysis can be different. It can be the prosecutor's office, the police department. It can be like a child advocate, like how the juvenile system is designed potentially. There are a lot of different sort of options of who can sign a U visa certification. Different offices have different policies about what U visa certifications they will sign. Some offices that I've been in contact with have no idea about what a U visa certification is, why they would sign it, how they would sign it, what they would consider, which is crazy to me because, it seems like it's something that's really talked about. But I always see that as a great opportunity to connect with somebody in law enforcement to help them make their communities safer, right? Help them help their community. And so that's a great opportunity to sort of explain what the U visa is, explain how law enforcement can help their community by providing the ability for people to feel safe in reporting crimes. All right, we've got a few questions coming in about U visas, and I think questions are always super, super helpful to illustrate a thing, right? So let's take a few of those, and I will give you more details as we go as well. All right, so Michelle, thanks for your question. Michelle, how are you today? All right, so what should I do if I'm a victim of a crime, but I do not have legal status in the US? Okay, so the easy answer here is to say, well, you should report the crime. Report the crime, Michelle, just report the crime. And we do want to report crimes, and we do want, people to be held accountable for perpetrating crimes against you. But I think that there's a little bit more nuance to any sort of analysis on what you do and how you do it, right? So if you don't have legal status in the United States, you may be afraid to report a crime. U visa is designed to protect you from fear of reprisal, of getting sent to immigration or anything like that. But not all crimes perpetrated against you may qualify for a U visa. So I think it's a good idea to call the police and report a crime. If you want to understand more before you do that about whether or not you would potentially be protected by a U visa, that's also okay too. Now, so I will give you a few examples of different types of crimes that qualify for U visa. But first, I guess the simple answer is, if you've been the victim of a crime, you can report it. And this, going back to what I was talking about regarding the new law, it's been, a lot of immigration advocates are really concerned that this new law could chill people reporting crimes, because they could be afraid that law enforcement under the new law would be required to investigate their status and take them into custody. It says pretty clearly in the things that we've read that the judicial the legislative intention was to not do that at all. So, but of course, we're going to see how it plays out. So let's keep watching that and talking about it. Okay. Demi has a question too. Let's see what she says. All right. Is it possible to make an adjustment of status with a U visa, or do I have to be renewing it? Okay. So I think that brings us to a really great question. And Demi asks it in a very a sophisticated way, right? Like adjustment of status. Let's break it down. What is the benefit of a U visa, right? So you file, like I was talking about, you get the certification. You file for the U visa, which is once you got the certification that you've been assisting in a crime and the reporting and the processing of somebody for a crime, then you can submit your application for a U visa to immigration. That's an application that has a waiting period, right? But it is a path to residency and citizenship for many people. There are people who cannot convert the granted U visa to a green card, and which is also residency or adjustment of status. Multiple different names for the same thing. If you, for example, have a permanent bar where you've had multiple entries within a certain time frame and that look a certain way, then you, in theory, might not be able to get the full green card. However, a U visa does provide you with the ability to get a work permit and be protected in the United States, okay? So once a U visa is granted, let me back up. Once you file for your U visa, you get a bona fide determination. And with that bona fide determination, you can get a work permit. Once the U visa is granted, which is quite a while these days. It's like 7 to 10 years of it pending, but now you have the ability to have the work permit the whole time. Once you get the U visa granted, you have 3 years to maintain lawful status, not have any issues with law enforcement and things like that. And then you can apply for your green card. For people who are not eligible to apply for the green card because they have a permanent bar, they can continue to renew the U visa for a while, okay? And can request that sort of, it's like a deferred action, the bona fide determination. So it's basically saying you're under a safe umbrella because of this thing that happened to you and the certification that you received. So it is possible to adjust your status and become a green card holder and then a citizen based on a U visa application. It is also possible to get a work permit while your U visa application is pending. Really, really wonderful application. One thing that a lot of people worry about is how did they enter the country? And if you know a lot about immigration law or you hear things through friends and family members, maybe you entered without inspection. The wonderful thing about a U visa is that you can apply for your green card here in the United States without having to leave, even if you entered without inspection, because it allows for a waiver for that. Also allows for a waiver for certain criminal convictions. That's pretty generous. And you can apply for the U visa even with a removal order and potentially get your removal order reopened. Okay, let's see. We've got some other questions I want to get to, okay? 1 second. Okay, cool. Okay, Luis has a great question. Let's see. So my sister was stabbed. No, sorry, my eyes jumped to the word stabbed. My sister was at a party and she saw a guy get stabbed. It was horrible and traumatic for her. Does she qualify for a U visa? Okay, so U visa does allow for sort of a bystander eligibility. And so the answer is potentially yes. Another scenario that we see is the person who was harmed is maybe a U.S. citizen, right? Maybe a U.S. citizen child under 18. The parents can qualify for a U visa, even though nothing happened to them. But they, stand in the shoes of the child. Same for, there is in the statute this thing about the, I forget what they call it, but it's like bystander or friend or something like that. It does exist. So Maria Batres was able to join us. I'm going to add her real quick. She might have some information to weigh in on that. I'm going to mute because we got a little bit of background noise here. Maria, do you have anything to add on this question?
So I caught the end of it, but so basically where we would have to assess is how it's listed and basically work with the certifier to determine if they feel that you were affected enough, right? Because one of the things that we have to establish for the U visa is that you were a victim of the crime, and that can sometimes be as a result as a bystander. So we would have to look at the specifics of your case. But I definitely think it's worth reaching out to us and finding out what we can about that and then trying it. It's something that doesn't necessarily hurt to try. Even in some cases where Elizabeth might have mentioned, some jurisdictions have certain regulations. We can always look into speaking with those prosecutors, speaking with those certifiers, and maybe helping explain the situations. And I do want to say, just in terms of even reporting it, Elizabeth, because I know at the beginning of this, you were talking about the new law. And, I know there's a lot of concerns about, well, are we going to report this? And then the police will come, they're going to check my status, I'll be arrested. And there is a specific section in the law that was already in place and was also emphasized in the amendments that they're making to it, that this is not something, the automatic background check, the automatic proof of status is not required in a case where someone is reporting a crime and seen as a witness or a victim or survivor of a crime. So our hope is, that won't be chilled. You won't be afraid to reach out to the police because of this new law, thinking, well, I don't have papers to prove my status in that situation. As Elizabeth said, it's still really important to be able to feel like you have the protection you are given the right to by being here in the United States, of being protected from crimes and being able to at least report a crime and then have that go through the justice system.
Yeah, I agree. We really want to encourage people and help you feel empowered to report, things that have happened to you. We do also at the same time understand that it's scary. So, we're here. We're here for whatever you need as far as to help make sure that you feel comfortable making that report. All right. So let's see. What else is really special about the U visa? Okay. I think one of the huge things about U visa that is a double-edged sword, like kind of two sides of the coin, that a lot of people maybe don't know or understand, is that, okay, well, number one, the crime has to have been in the United States, right? A U visa application is not in and of itself a shield from deportation, right? It's not something that can be filed with the immigration judge. The immigration judge can make a decision on. It has to be processed through USCIS. But you don't have to be in the United States to file it or get it granted. So say you were the victim of a crime. You've since left the United States. Maybe you were deported, or maybe you left voluntarily. Maybe, who knows what's going on, but you're not in the United States. You can file a U visa. You can get that granted, and you can get an admission to the United States based on the U visa. So it is like actually a visa. So it can admit you into the United States. Now, while it's not like a shield to deportation, it is a discretionary piece of information that can help you potentially prevent yourself from being subject to deportation. So it's something that we can use if it's filed. We can use to ask the prosecutors in immigration court to maybe agree to reopen your case or dismiss your case if you currently have a removal proceedings pending. So it isn't like 100% guaranteed, but it's definitely something that can play into the mix. Do you see that, Maria, very often?
Absolutely. I have seen that situation, especially also depending upon the policies, right? In like under the last administration, there were very few cases that were granted long continuances or even termination in immigration court when we would demonstrate there is a U visa available, right? Sometimes we can ask an immigration judge if there's a form of relief that's upcoming. Sometimes judges will hold the case for a certain amount of time to see if that gets approved, to give an opportunity. And we actually did see, unfortunately, some judges issuing orders of deportation in the last few years, because there is such a long wait time for the U visa that the courts say, well, we can't just keep this case on the docket for that long. And so if there is no other relief, they have ordered that. But then I have seen people come back from that, right? I've seen people enter the U.S. and be able to start their 3 years now present in the U.S. and move towards their adjustment of status and green card. And the other way I've seen people come to the U.S., Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit or if you already had about this, is derivative and family members.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking about next, because that's so beautiful. I love when we're able to include derivatives, but also bring derivatives from outside of the United States into the United States lawfully and with like lawful status and a straight path to residency. You want to tell folks about that?
Absolutely. And then I might have you jump in on some as well. But absolutely, if you have, depending upon the age of your children, or if you have a spouse, there are certain people that we call derivatives, which are essentially immediate family members. It does have to be an immediate family member. For children, generally, they have to be under the age of 21 at the time of filing. But we can add them onto the application. And we also will assess with them, do they have any issues of inadmissibility? So for example, if they had a prior order and that's why they're no longer in the US, if they've had attempts to enter the US that weren't successful, those are all things that we also can request waivers for. But once a family member is approved under the U visa, and they come in, as Elizabeth said, with their status, their U visa status. They come in under a document that has a U on it. And then from the time of entry, they need to remain in the US for 3 years from that time of entry. So sometimes they may enter after the parent or the other main family member gets their U visa. And so the date starts counting at that point. And then within 3 years, after 3 years, then you start the application for the green card. And it like you said, it's really a beautiful process to reunite families in a way that's going to allow them to enter lawfully and not reach some of the struggles that maybe the parents had to encounter coming over before.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, and that is particularly special when a parent is here and maybe they have some children in their home country that they haven't been able to visit for quite some time because they weren't able to leave the United States. And so in order to reunite the family and maybe the older children get to meet some new siblings and things like that, it's really wonderful. So we love doing those. And I think another tip that I would like to share regarding derivatives is if you have like a spouse can qualify as a derivative, right? If you have a US citizen child that maybe was the victim of a crime and both biological parents can stand in the shoes of the alleged victim and be a principal themselves, I always recommend that each parent get their own certification and file their own U visa application. And the reason why rather than being one a derivative of the other, is because until that U visa is finalized and the people have adjusted status to green card holder, the derivative spouse could potentially lose their eligibility should something happen to the principal spouse. So death or divorce, these things are completely unforeseen. And a U visa can take 10 years to process, maybe even more in the future, because there's only so many that can be granted at a time. So much can happen that's unforeseen in a decade. You spend a little bit more on the front end to make sure that both parents are set up for getting their U visa and qualifying and being able to move forward to residency, regardless of how the future unfolds with the relationship or with the principal spouse being alive. Like these are real considerations. And a lot of our work can be somewhat morbid. Like it's uncomfortable to talk about. Like you could potentially in a decade get divorced, or one of the parents could pass away. But this is a reality, and we've seen it. We've seen it happen where if people didn't take the extra step to both get a certification and both apply as a principal, that it sets the surviving spouse or the derivative spouse back potentially a decade in the waiting list because they didn't just file separate principal applications. So that's something that I would recommend to keep an eye out for and to consider if you are considering filing a U visa. What else, Maria? Do you have any other tips for people on thinking about filing a U visa? You're muted.
Sorry, I was noting that I think we have a question maybe from Miguel, a new question. I'm not sure if it's one you.
Oh, yeah.
So
Thank you.
that's actually a good segue, I think, into, something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens if they assault me and steal my car? So I don't know, Miguel, do you mean like you were actually like physically, like assault in the law is a little bit different than how people utilize the word assault. So the legal definition is usually being put in fear or apprehension of an unreasonable touching. Doesn't mean you were actually touched or harmed, but most people use assault to mean that you were actually touched or harmed. And in the U visa context, I think that distinction is kind of important. Don't you, Maria?
Absolutely. And I think too, that's something we would need to talk with you more about, and potentially, help you get the police report to assess that. Because I get a lot of questions about, oh, I was robbed. And in the legal terms, the term rob is very different than burglarized, right? There's two different terms, and one involves you actually being present and one involves you not. So, we have a number of clients who say, well, my house, when I was on vacation, we came home and everything was gone. They had destroyed everything. That's not you're not even though, yes, you have survived that, you've been affected by it, you're probably living in fear as a result of that. Unfortunately, when it comes to qualifying the type of crime and you as a direct victim of the actual assault or, offense at the time, that can affect things. So absolutely. But, we saw in the news recently just a situation where I can't remember if he was an actor, an athlete that was recently shot while they were trying to steal a catalytic converter. That would definitely be a situation. The goal was to steal the car, but someone was physically harmed in that. And so, if that was a situation of an immigrant, then even a family member, because if someone has unfortunately passed from the crime, then we look to the surviving members as well, in some of those abilities to look at that if they were witness to it, et cetera.
Yeah. And there is not, don't take what we're saying that there's a bright line rule that you have to be physically harmed in order to get a U visa. That is something that people believe, and it is not true. So if you brought the facts, that you've got here in the question to us, we would want to know more, right? We would want to understand the bigger picture situation as much as possible. And so you being like really open with us about who was it? How did you know them? Was it part of something bigger? For example, was it part of a previous romantic relationship that kind of has taken a turn? Could be domestic violence offense that could potentially qualify. False imprisonment can potentially qualify. So false imprisonment can be where somebody stops your movement and forces you to be stuck. Mm-hmm. There's a qualifying list of qualifying crimes. And that's where the legal expertise comes in, right? Of knowing and understanding. And also it's kind of another place where knowing criminal law and immigration law is so important, because all of these sort of terms, if you practice criminal law and immigration, you can understand what they mean. Whereas if you just practice immigration law, you can't just rattle off the black letter law version of what these different types of crimes are. So that's, I think, a place where we're able to really add value in analyzing whether somebody is eligible for a U visa.
Absolutely. And Miguel, thank you for that question, because you are sharing a feeling that a lot of our clients feel. How can I report it to the police? How can I call them? Especially some people feel they live in areas where, somebody's looking out for people who are undocumented and maybe not going to believe you, maybe not understand you if you need translation services, et cetera. We still encourage, reporting if you've been the victim of a crime. Absolutely. That is, unfortunately, as Elizabeth mentioned early on, a large part of why certain groups are targeted, because they believe no one will report it. No one is going to turn them in. As we said, in Georgia, the law, for example, where they're supposed to check your papers and see if you have status, that is not supposed to happen. That doesn't mean it may not. And if that case happens, then you reach out to us as well, because there's a case there. If you end up getting arrested for something along those lines or being put into immigration proceedings, then, we can certainly help you. We understand that's a challenge. What we do want you to do is be able to feel like you can be protected by the law enforcement, and that you should not have to be victims of these crimes without getting some sort of justice, or at least being heard about what happened to you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, unfortunately, some jurisdictions kind of have some policies that, we only investigate this type of crime, or we only maybe sign U visa certifications with these types of crimes. But in our practice and in our firm, we don't just take those sort of policies as that they're written in stone, right? Any sort of policy is just an idea of how you would like to do things, in my mind, and someone can be persuaded to potentially sign a U visa certification, even though it doesn't fit within the larger policy, because ultimately the policy was created to accomplish a goal and try to establish some consistency. And so we, have had opportunities where we maybe got a no or a person tried to do it themselves, get a U visa certification, and they got a no, and we were able to meet with law enforcement, meet with the victim advocate, meet with the U visa certifier, the person that was, in charge of that department in some larger police departments, and ask them to reconsider their decision on a U visa certification, or even a police department reconsider investigating a crime, and how they're approaching the actual report. So I think, if you've tried to get a U visa certification and you've been unsuccessful, or you've heard like it's not even worth reporting because, for example, this county never signs those or something like that, we challenge you to not just take that for granted, but to actually, consider that it could be useful, and it could turn into something with like the right advocacy and the right support. So, yeah. All right. So I think that's all of our questions. Thank you. And we're over 30 minutes. It's hard to stay within 30 minutes because there's so much to talk about. And all of these applications in front of immigration, or that we can file with immigration, may seem really simple, but they have a lot of nuance and a lot of places where it's complicated, right? That's part of the reason why we love this area of practice, but also another reason why it's great to have an attorney by your side. So we are so glad to have been with you tonight. We really enjoyed it. And thank you for all the great questions. We really had some really awesome questions. So we hope that you'll join us again next week, Wednesday at 7, and we'll talk more about whatever you guys want to talk about. Bring your questions, bring your comments, bring your concerns, and let us know what you want to talk about. Okay?
Y recuerden que aunque este fue en inglés, siempre tomamos preguntas en español. Estamos aquí para servirles también en español. Entonces, por favor, comparten estos videos y llegue a vernos en la próxima, la semana entrante a las 7. Gracias.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.